worries me, right? Like the sort of stuff I watched and enjoyed when I was even in my teens would immediately get both the people who made it and me watching it cancelled these days, right? Like the classic British comedies of the 70s and 80s, Heidi High, and, they're just the worst possible, pretty offensive stereotypes.
That is such a good segue, actually, because I'm going to bring up my new favorite Google search, Perplexity. Perplexity needs a name to go like, I'm perplexing something. So I perplexity'd a bunch of questions from the last podcast. I found out the background as to why the Zoidberg jokes were making you feel awkward. So I asked Perplexity, what is the social, political, racial, cultural background behind the character of Zoidberg from Futurama? And it says, Zoidberg is one of Futurama's most layered characters, with his backstory and characterization reflecting several cultural themes. His depiction draws on immigrant experiences, Jewish stereotypes, and humor. It goes on a little bit about how Zoidberg's journey is a mirror for an immigrant story, and specifically is heavily inspired by Jewish culture, Jewish humor, Yiddish-inflected accents and mannerisms. So you probably were right when you were like, I feel a little bit awkward because it feels racist, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
What does it mean to have a human in the loop?
Human in the loop. Human in the loop. What in the world is a human in the loop?
Being a human in the loop.
AI in the loop. Humans in charge.
Welcome to Human in the Loop. Okay, so this is the loop back where we loop back to what we said last week, correct mistakes, dive a little deeper into some source material, and find out what's going on in the world of tech and AI this week. So one of the first things that came up, and you didn't state it like fact, but did say look it up, maybe someone like Aristotle said something in the effect of, oh, the youth of today. So I looked into the quote or the origin. Apparently Socrates is credited with this paraphrase quote, which says, the children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children now are tyrants, not the servants of their household. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers. Apparently, research shows it's not even Socrates, though it's often quoted. And Aristotle wrote frequently on the nature of youth. Yeah, so in general, it's fair to say that every philosopher, including you and I, thinks that the current youth are wayward. But you stuck up for them in the conversation, to be fair.
I've mentioned a few times I have anarchist tendencies, right? And I just like there's a whole conversation we won't get into about freedom and the difficulty of freedom in society, right? Like nobody can be perfectly free. Well, exactly one person could be perfectly free at a significant cost to anyone else. But we always have to set these boundaries around where we're free and when we're not. But in general, I'm on the side of trying not to tell people how they should do stuff because it doesn't work. It's not even like a moral, well, where should you get off telling me how to live my life? It's just, in general, telling people they should do stuff doesn't work. You have to use an extreme amount of force to try and get them to do things. And as soon as you're not looking, they're going to go back to doing it the way they want to, right? Convincing somebody that something is a good idea is much more effective than telling somebody they have to do something. And I think that's true whether the people you're telling are children or adults or staff or family members or, regardless of the relationship.
With the exception of fill in your timesheets.
It's a good example of like something we have to tell them to do because it's hard to convince them, right? But it would be more effective if we could convince them that it was a valuable activity, and that's what I focus on when I'm, whenever we've got process, it's more around why this is good for the client, why this is good for our business, rather than just do this because I told you to do it.
Well, we talked with Melindy about Dunbar's number and social media being something that crosses over that. And just to explain further, because it's interesting, Dunbar's number is the theoretical cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships. And you kind of defined it a little bit tightly, which is reflected here. It's defined as relationships where an individual knows who each person is and how they relate to every other person in the group. So that's an interesting thing I hadn't factored in. It's not just how many people do you know, do they also know each other, and you're a cohesive unit. So it was proposed by British anthropologist Robin Dunbar in the 90s. This number is commonly cited around 150, and Dunbar arrived at this figure by correlating primate brain size with average social group size and then extrapolated it out to humans based on the size of the human neocortex. So the social networks were layered. The closest circle is around 5 loved ones, followed by 15 good friends, 50 friends, and up to 150 meaningful contacts. Beyond this, people might recognize up to 1,500 individuals, but usually the only innermost 150 would be considered genuine, stable relationships. And I personally feel that's it holds true.
Technology does allow us to go beyond the limits of our brain, right? So I could see social networks potentially expanding that a little bit, right? 200, 250. I don't think anyone's sort of done that experiment about how the good parts of social networking might allow you to have more people that you consider your friends.
It would be interesting to know that number was devised in the 90s, pre-social media. Our brains are now able to hold more friends. We're also in a situation where we're getting updated on people's lives constantly, and it might not be 100% accurate, but you could understand the general goings-on of well more than 150 people.
Yeah, I think social networks have definitely and quite actively distorted what we would have used as the definition of friend. You're getting these updates about people's lives, but actually I think that's probably one of the most damaging parts of social networks and social media is you don't see other people's lives. You see a really carefully curated view of just the most perfect elements of that person's life, and often a manipulated view even then, right? So nobody's posting on Facebook showing that, unless they're a particular person who likes to thrive off drama, they're not showing, the dropping the plate and making a mess on the floor and having to spend an hour cleaning it up. Or so it's more like a reality TV show version of all of those other people's lives, right? It's only the bits that are going to create an emotional reaction in the viewer.
And I think that's one of the really good cases for the social media age restriction, because we got to get right up into our 20s before we had that level of pressure. Have you seen a movie or heard about a movie called Love Me? I think this would be so up your alley, Hamish. And anyone else who was a big fan, for example, of the movie Her, anything that really gets your brain tickling on the intersection of human emotion and technology. I'll give you the Cliff's Notes, or at least the internet overview. So, Love Me, Kristen Stewart, Stephen Yeun. I don't think there's going to be spoilers, but if you're the type of person who doesn't like to know about movies, just skip over. A buoy, like a buoy, and a satellite meet online long after humanity's extinction as they learn what life was like on Earth, because they are connected via the satellite. They discover themselves and what it means to be alive and in love. It was one of those movies that just captivated me from the get-go, because you've got two AI intelligent or smart tech pieces. You get the sense that humanity's ended and the physical Earth is still turning. But again, it's not a spoiler to say, but the context is that the satellite was launched into orbit with a a digital archive of the history of humanity and access to everything. So it is able to educate the smart buoy. And even though it's the boy, that is Kristen Stewart, the buoy character, and Stephen Yeun is the satellite. I won't say much more about how they develop personas and stuff, but it does draw on the fact that if all humans are sharing on social media as the best parts, what would happen if another entity came along and got that view of humanity? Watch it. Highly recommend you watch it. I think you'll really like it. Okay, so this is more like a current affairs thing. Claude 4 has come out to much excitement and criticism.
So, yes, Claude 4 is out. They have released both a version of Sonnet, which is their medium cost model, and also a new version of Opus, which is their high cost model, which they haven't updated for quite a while. So it's interesting that they see value in the new retraining of Opus. These days, there's a couple of ways to measure whether a LLM version is better or not. And one is to look at the benchmarks, right? Like there's a variety of different benchmarks for different tasks that model developers use to assess whether their new model is better than their old model. And the issue with benchmarks is they leak into the public domain and then into new training data, right? So in some cases, if you are a not particularly honest researcher, you might feed the benchmark to your AI model so that you can keep getting those grants. But even if you are perfectly honest and don't deliberately feed it through these benchmarks, in the public domain, they leak through. It's impossible to completely isolate your AI from seeing parts of those benchmarks unless you don't give it any new information. And so those benchmarks are sort of knowingly problematic in terms of assessing historic versus new model capability. So then the other way is just use it in your day-to-day the same way as you would use the previous model. I'm a pretty heavy user of Claude from 3.5, 3.7, 4. It doesn't seem particularly better or worse for my use case yet. I haven't noticed any improvement, but I haven't really noticed any degradation. Unlike from 3.5 to 3.7, if you asked 3.5 who was Hamish Freelander, it would say, they don't seem like they're particularly famous, but here's what I know about them so far. But be aware that because they're pretty obscure, this could all be wrong. And then when you ask 3.7, it said, I don't know who that is. So that's disappointing. The very little bit that Sonnet ever learned about me, it forgot in the update.
Oh.
It does seem to be cheaper for them to run because at work, we pay for Claude. And that has usage limits. And then on my personal stuff, I just use the free plan, and that has limits. And I would run into them reasonably often when it was 3.7, and I don't remember running into them since they've released 4. I don't know if that's just because they've added new hardware or if 4 has actually been optimized for lower cost inference. And so they're able to give people more usage within the same cost envelope. That is something that all of the AI companies are looking at because most of them they don't expose their financials, most of them, but it's assumed that they're all losing money at the current cost of those plans, partly because they have so many users who are using the free version, but also because the costs of running this inference is enormous, right? You look at the capex that the Microsoft and Anthropic and OpenAI are putting into building, data centers. They're talking about buying nuclear power plants or doing, 20-year contracts in nuclear power plants so they can get enough power to run these data centers. That's an enormous cost, and they are not charging people enough to recover that cost in any sort of reasonable time frame. But my assumption is either they will have to come up with new models that cost less to run, or they will have to significantly increase the price they're charging for access, or both.
Okay. Statistics of trampoline injuries. I do feel bad, but not so many people died. Maybe 6 people in the decade of the 19th died. However, it does seem that the injuries were significant. massive increases, serious injuries and hospitalizations. The types of injuries were fractures, dislocations, limb fractures, soft tissue, lacerations. I mean, holy heck, I do feel a little bad. So, as spring-free trampolines and caged or enclosed trampolines came in, definitely the injury rates went down. But here's validation of the point I was making. The traditional hazards went down, so there were less fractures and what they call product-related injuries. But the injuries related to risky behaviour went up. Flips, more than one person on a trampoline at one time. So, inherent risks both ways. I still feel bad a little bit, but it does go to show that there is, when you're dealing with children, sometimes implementing a guardrail can actually increase risky behaviour because kids just constantly want to push boundaries.
It's a related, conceptually, story, and we'll have to do the loop back on the loop back because I'm going to talk about something I remember off the internet. In Europe, there was an experiment for a while. Or something, I can't remember what they called it, like clean streets or naked streets or something. Basically, they took away all of the guidance and the street signs and the road markings and everything. So no middle road markings, no side markings, no speed limits, no pedestrian crossings or anything. And the number of accidents went down because there wasn't the indication around, like this is what you do to stay safe. People drove a lot slower because they weren't sure what they were doing was safe, right? So increasing the risk reduced the number of injuries because people assessed the risk higher and so took less risky behavior. But then somebody in the news over there said, well, if that's true, we should require every car to be built with a giant spike pointing out of the steering wheel at the driver. That probably would work in terms of just nobody would drive a car. It would become so insanely dangerous and so scary people would choose not to do it, right? So, there's I'm sure there's some sort of complex feedback curve or feedback model because there's also people getting used to risk over time, right? Like something initially looks dangerous, but then you sort of push the limit and nothing happens. So you just keep upping your level of acceptable risk until something goes wrong, and then it's way worse than it otherwise could have been.
Coming back to so Danu can't join us for this loop back, so he can't defend himself, but he claimed that a metre was the most dangerous height for a human to fall from, and Perplexity would say there is no single most dangerous height. If you're talking about fatality, absolutely well over a metre is fatal compared to under a metre. You can have a fatal case if someone falls from a small height, especially if they land on their neck.
Did he say fatal?
No, but what do you consider dangerous?
Well, because he was using ACC numbers, right? And so ACC are focused on injuries, right? And this is my defending of Danu. He was tried to be clear at the time that he's giving ACC numbers. And so so there's a couple of things that are likely to lead to that 1 meter. The first is you're just not going to get many situations where you're making employees go significantly higher than a meter. And so the data is going to be pretty limited, but also something similar to what we were just talking about, right? Like if you're climbing up 6 meters, especially if it's not something you do all the time, you're going to be pretty careful because it's something that has a higher level of risk associated with it. So,
okay, well, if we say the most dangerous height to fall from and still be likely to survive, it says around 5 to 7 meters. But yeah, I mean, certainly if you fall from standing over and you hit your head, it's not going to be a good time.
Yeah, I mean, the surface you fall onto is much more important than the height you fall from, I think.
Yeah. No, fair point. Oh, well, that's the loop back for today.
Thanks for listening. Give us a like or a thumbs up or whatever the hell you're supposed to do to promote this sort of stuff. And see you next time.
loop.